So now let's talk about Beanstalk. So when we have deployed a web application in AWS, we typically follow an architecture called a three-tier architecture. So our users talk to a load balancer that could be in multiple availability zones. Then the load balancer will forward traffic to multiple EC2 instances managed by an autoscaling group. And then these EC2 instances need to store data somewhere, so they will use a database such as Amazon RDS for a relational database to read and write data. And if they need to have an in-memory database for an in-memory cache, then they can also use Elasticache to store and retrieve the session data or the cached data. Now, this architecture is something we can easily reproduce manually. We can also reproduce it on AWS through CloudFormation, but there is a better way. So when you're a developer on AWS, you don't want to be managing infrastructure, you just want to be deploying code, okay? You don't want to be able to configure all the databases, the load balancers, etc., and you want to make sure that whatever you're doing scales. And as we saw, most web applications will have the same or a similar architecture with a load balancer and an autoscaling group. So as a developer on AWS, all that you want to do is to run your code. Possibly, you want to run your code for different applications and environments the same way. So there comes Elastic Beanstalk. So Elastic Beanstalk is a developer-centric view of deploying an application on AWS. So behind Beanstalk, we have the same components we've seen before. So your EC2 instances, your autoscaling group, your Elastic Load Balancer, your RDS database, etc. But in Beanstalk, it's a developer-centric view, so it's one view that's easy to make sense of with everything in it. And we still have control over the configuration of all the components, but it is all within Beanstalk. So Beanstalk, from a cloud perspective, is a platform as a service, or PaaS, because we just worry about the code. So to summarize, we saw infrastructure as a service, so IaaS. We saw platform as a service for Beanstalk, PaaS. And then we're going to see software as a service for other services on AWS. So using Beanstalk is free, but you're going to pay for the underlying instances. So Elastic Beanstalk is a managed service. That means that all the EC2 instance configuration and operating system will be handled by Beanstalk itself. The deployment strategy can be configured, but again, the deployment itself is going to be performed by Elastic Beanstalk. All the capacity provisioning through an autoscaling group and load balancing are done by Beanstalk. And the application health monitoring and responsiveness is also included in the Beanstalk dashboard. So what is your responsibility as a developer? Well, just the application code. And that makes Elastic Beanstalk a very developer-friendly service. There are three architecture models with Elastic Beanstalk. The first one is single instance deployment, which is good for development environment. But if you want to scale up, you can have a load balancer and an ASG, which is going to be great for production or pre-production web applications. And finally, if you want to have non-web apps in production, for example, workers, you have an option to only have an auto-scaling group as a standalone. Beanstalk can be used to support many platforms, for example, Go, Java, as well as .NET, Node.js, PHP, Python, Ruby, Packer, Docker, multi-Docker, and pre-configured Docker. And finally, if it's not supported, you can write your own platform. You don't need to remember this for the exam, but as you can see, Beanstalk supports a lot of ways to deploy your application, including Docker and many programming languages. Finally, a question that may come up in the exam is around health monitoring. So Beanstalk does have a full monitoring suite available within the service itself. And so there's going to be a health agent on each EC2 instance within Beanstalk that is going to push metrics to CloudWatch. And then within Beanstalk, you can view these metrics, do some monitoring and so on. But it will also check for application health and will publish health events. So these are just a bunch of screenshots that I've gotten to really show you that Beanstalk is a way to do health monitoring for your applications, okay? So now I really want to give you an idea of how Elastic Beanstalk works. So I will see you in the next lecture for the hands-on to give you a concrete demo.